new sponsees who's joined since we had our last one in December, our meeting in December. So welcome to our new sponsees, and I'd encourage you to please get in contact with your regional sponsee leads. Most, if not all, groups meet every month. So if the regional leads were on the call, if you could please just drop your details in the chat, and then any new sponsees, can you please reach out? It's really good to join these sessions. Good to build your network locally as well. Right, so today we have a session on coaching and its benefits. And this topic comes from our last, not our last one, the one prior to this one, our sponsee survey that we had. So we'd asked the sponsees what support they would need going forward from the program. So coaching was one of the topics that was highlighted. And we're very fortunate enough to have Chris Harrop today with us, who will be talking to us about coaching and its benefits. And we will hold on to questions until after Chris has done his session. As always, please, let's keep it interactive, especially towards the end. Hold on to your questions. So I'll hand over to Chris.
Thank you, Natasha. Thanks for that warm welcome, and great to see everybody. Great to be part of this this network. So thank you for inviting me. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I do have some slides, but I'm not sure whether I've got the technical ability to load those slides. So I was hoping that maybe Natasha or Megan might be able to help me out. Otherwise, you might have to bear with me for a couple of seconds while I try to load them through my PowerPoint. So
that's fine. Bear with me 1 second whilst I
if you are able to do that, I'm sure you're far more competent than I am at doing these things.
That's okay. Bear with me 1 second.
Thank you. I mean, whilst you're doing that, maybe I can just give you a bit of background into my experience and why I'm so interested in coaching. So I am 34 years experienced in the NHS. Whenever you say that, you think, well, surely that begs the comment, isn't it about time you moved on? But yeah, 34 years has gone in a flash, really. But I am an ex-director of finance, so I've walked in many of your shoes in terms of some of the roles that you may be doing at the moment, and I've worked up from quite a low level within the finance function. And then latterly, before I joined this role, I was a chief exec at a specialist neurosciences provider in Liverpool. So all told, as DOF and CEO at that organisation, I was there for nearly 15 years. And now I head up an audit and advisory service across the Northwest. Thank you very much for that. So if maybe flick to the next slide, because that sort of talks to what I'm just describing now, if that's okay. Thank you. So yeah, so that my experience is quite significant in the area of health. So as I was saying, I'm now the managing director of an audit and advisory service that covers the Northwest. We're based mainly in Liverpool, but we have offices in parts of Cheshire, Manchester, and in Lancashire as well. So that's me in a nutshell. My interest in coaching goes back well over 10 years. So I've experienced coaching from the perspective of being coached. So as a coachee, I've been on the receiving end of coaching as an individual and within a team. So I can wholeheartedly say it's one of the best things I've ever got involved in, and certainly from the point of view of being able to develop my career and just get independent perspective on some of the challenges that I faced. It's been absolutely invaluable in helping me. So I would definitely endorse it from a personal perspective. And then that really got me interested in seeing it from the other side of the table as well, or the other side of the couch, depending on which metaphor you want to use. So I started to get involved in developing as a coach, so doing some informal experience and that kind of thing. And then that led to me doing a more formal qualification. So I did a postgraduate certificate in coaching at Leeds Beckett Uni a few years ago. And then since then, I've been involved in lots of different aspects of coaching. So from individual coaching to team coaching to actually taking part in coach supervision as well. So that's when you effectively coach the coach. So from lots of different angles, I've been involved in coaching practice. And then as a consequence of that, I suppose it does start to have a knock-on effect on how you do things. So on a day-to-day basis, I like to think that coaching philosophy and that coaching style has become much more ingrained in how I do things. So yeah, that's really my coaching journey in a nutshell. So we'll talk a little bit more about what coaching is in a minute, but again, I'll just try and pause. It's very hard when you got the slides up to see everybody, but are there any questions or anything that anybody wants to ask before we go any further?
We don't have any hands up, so I think you can go ahead.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, if we move on to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, but obviously this is the essence of this session, isn't it? So what is coaching? So again, if I can flick through to the next one, if that's okay. I'm sure if you Google this, you find all manner of useful definitions of what coaching is and what it isn't. And quite often, I think people tend to get caught in that conversation of what's the difference between coaching and mentoring. So I thought I'd start with that to begin with and say coaching can be defined really however you want it to be defined. But typically, in my experience, it's about a more defined issue. So people who come to coaching have normally got a thing on their mind or a thing that's troubling them, and there's an issue that needs to be resolved. And quite often coaching is a really effective way of helping that individual resolve that issue. So in my experience, and I think in many people's experience, it's much more short term, it's much more focused, it's defined around a certain thing, it's more structured, and then if you like, you can actually measure the outcome. So you've got a particular thing that needs to be resolved. It can be longer term, so mentoring tends to be more about understanding the lived experience of the mentor and using that experience to try and guide and influence and support the mentee. But there are similarities, so both can be formal or informal. I think coaching tends to be more structured and more formal. They can both focus on long-term issues like career development and personal development, so it doesn't have to be about that thing that's occupying your attention right now. But as a sort of process of building towards a longer term solution, I think quite often you take these things in bite-sized chunks and work through them. But then you can have a long-term coaching relationship that helps you develop your career. So again, speaking personally, I worked with the same coach when I was director of finance and chief exec for nearly 10 years, and that relationship was really, really helpful to me. So it can be long-term. It doesn't have to be short-term. The ingredients that go into coaching we'll touch on as we talk through this conversation, but a lot of this is about a growth mindset. So I'm sure again you've read many articles or you've heard people speak about the difference between fixed and growth mindsets. Quite often with coaching, it's not rocket science. The things that are going to make a difference and the things that you might need to work on to change are the things that you already know about. But it's how you bring that to the forefront of your consciousness in a way that's going to help you then start to look at the solution. So that's where having an open mind is absolutely essential to coaching. And as I say, you can find lots of different definitions of coaching. So there's one there for you to take away and use, and then some examples of what people might say coaching is and what it isn't. So I hope that gives you some kind of flavour of this. Again, if I move on to the next slide, I'll try and sort of build on some of these things in a bit more detail. So, the benefits of coaching hopefully are going to be fairly obvious to most people, but if you've raised it as part of the expectations and some of the requirements that you feel you need as being part of this network, you'll already have arrived at the conclusion that coaching can be a really good thing. So you can develop that long-term benefit from having more belief, more self-confidence. There's lots of opportunity for this to be more than just about individuals. You can do things at a team level. So if you've got a particular function within your finance team, you might want to look at that and do some team coaching with that group of people. Or you could have a wider approach to this. So you could actually look at the whole finance function. You can look at segments of an organization. It doesn't have to be restricted to individuals or small groups. It does encourage and enable individuals to own the problem. So like I was saying before, the simplicity of coaching is very obvious, isn't it? You're not coming with a whole range of tools and techniques. It's not hugely techy or hugely complicated. Typically, this is about a couple of individuals working through issues and coming up with a solution. But then the importance of this and the real success of coaching is when you own that issue and you own the solution. And it's only then, through bringing all of these things to your consciousness, that you're able to change and then adapt and develop new habits, new behaviors, new ways of doing things and framing problems in a different way that enables you to have what you call sustainable change. So without that, you're not going to have those quick fixes. So I suppose you could liken it to any area of self-improvement or self-change. When you think about things like diet and exercise, these things don't come easy. So if you embark on a program of fitness and trying to change your diet, it doesn't happen overnight. Success comes after lots of hard months trying to change habits that have become ingrained, and it's recognizing those triggers. What triggers your negative thoughts, emotions, and behaviors? How do you then reframe that and convert that to more positive ways of doing things? And these things have to become habit over time, and it's how you can work through those things with a coach to make those changes more sustainable. It is flexible, so yeah, the great thing about this is you can do it anywhere. So you don't need too much in terms of infrastructure, providing you've got a confidential space to be able to have these conversations. And providing you've got that most precious of commodities, time, you're able to do this. You can do coaching anywhere. Seriously, you can. So the environment has to be right, the ambience has to be right, the confidentiality is absolutely crucial, but you don't need many tools to be able to do this. It can be very, very flexible, but it's just about learning a different way of having these conversations, both as a coachee and as a coach. It's not a panacea, so I'm not going to stand here and say this is the be all and end all, and if you only do one thing, do coaching. Coaching has worked for me and continues to do so. It's not for everyone, so depending on how you are receptive to these things, it might be the best thing you've ever done. You might hate it. It's as simple as that. It's like everything in life, it doesn't work for everyone. But I would at least encourage people who haven't tried coaching to give it a go. And if you've got access to people who can give you that coaching support, then please try it and see what you think. And I think for the majority of people, it would be a real benefit, but it isn't suitable for everybody. I think that goes without saying. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm just going to try and work through the tail end of this presentation to focus on things that are much more practical that you could take away and actually start to work on yourselves or in groups or as part of your network. So I don't know if anyone's heard of this first thing. So the GROW model is probably the most common model that is used in coaching. So has anyone heard of the GROW model and knows what it represents? Just have a quick scan around. Can't see everyone's hands going up, so I don't know, Natasha, if you're able to see whether anyone's responded.
We've got a few head shakes, so I think you can go ahead and talk us through.
Take it as a no then. So GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and wrap up. There's different variations of this if you Google it, but pretty much that's a useful working definition of what GROW stands for. So I didn't put this up in detail, so I'm just going to talk through it. Obviously, starting with the goal, if you have any coaching session, they can be completely unrelated or there can be a series of linked conversations, but the goal is obviously the focus. So that's the thing, that's the issue that I referred to earlier on that might be occupying your attention. So, any of us right now could go into a coaching session and say, right, okay, I'm pretty clear. I know what my goal is. I know what I want to get from this because that's the issue. That's the thing that's bothering me at the moment. So that's the thing I want to resolve. So that becomes your focus. The next stage then is to sort of get yourself into what's the reality. So quite often the reason why as individuals we can't move on with these things, or as teams we can't move on with these things, is we're stuck in that endless cycle of, well, I've got this thing that's bothering me, but I'm not sure where I'm actually starting from in terms of how I'm going to solve it. And the great thing about coaching is it starts to focus your attention on the here and now, and it starts to focus your attention on what the real issues are. And then from that, you can start to look at what you can do about it. So that R bit is, however long it takes, focus on the reality of where we're at. So not an assumption about where we're at, where are we at? What's the starting point? You then move on to O, which is, well, what options do we have? So that's when you start to explore the possible ways forward. So the skill of the coach is not to prescribe and not to say, I know what your problem is and this is what you should do about it. It's really a case of, well, what are the options? Let's talk these through. What do you think are the potential ways forward? How might you go about resolving X or Y? And from that, you can start to flesh out the different choices that might appear. And quite often that's the most the moment that people have an epiphany and realize, right, okay, I now know what I need to do about this, and suddenly you start to get confidence about a way forward. The option becomes clear. Ownership then follows from that. So you could say the second O there is ownership, which is key to this, and then you can move on. So the final stage there is the wrap up. So that could either be, how do you close off that particular coaching session? How do you agree a way forward in the short term? That might lead to your next coaching session. That's fine. It could be that it's just a one-off, and that's the resolution. So that's the wrap up. So depending on the circumstances and depending on how many coaching sessions you're having, or what the issue is, it might be nice and succinct, and you've got a neat package there. You've got your goal, you've got your options, you've got a way forward, and then you've got the wrap up. So it's a really simple model. It's something that's dead easy to remember, and it's something that anyone can use in any situation. It doesn't have to be restricted to a coaching session. You could actually use this in practice in some of your next team meetings or discussions that you're having with some of your team members. So maybe go away and try it and see what you think, and see whether that works for you. But most importantly, just think about the reaction that either you're feeling or the person that you're having the conversation is feeling. So do you get that kind of moment of epiphany when you realize that there's something going on there that you hadn't thought about, and you suddenly find that way of moving forward that had been eluding you for whatever reason? So it doesn't work every time, but quite often, if you keep practicing this and keep trying that model, it does work more often than not. Following on from that, there's again, quite common to lots of professional practice now, and continuing professional development, is reflective practice. So it's how do you get into the rhythm and the habit of doing that? So you can all do this alone, or you could do it in groups, or you could do it as part of this network. So how do you share issues? How do you reflect on how you responded to challenges, or whatever the thing might be that you're trying to resolve? And then how do you get some feedback and some peer support from people to say, well, how can I do this differently? So really important to build that into your routine. So whether that's your daily routine, do you go away and sort of write a diary of the 3 things that went well or didn't go well today, or do you do it every week? Do you do it alone? And what I do with this is probably like most people. You sort of think about, well, what am I trying to achieve on a week-to-week basis? Did I move things in the right direction? Have I got an action plan for the week ahead? So simple things like that. It just gives you that focus and that ability to reflect on what you're doing, where are you spending your time and your energy, and is that right? And if you can get a second opinion on that, then even better. The listening part of coaching is absolutely crucial. So some textbooks and some theory refers to it as figure and ground, and really what that means is, are you paying attention to the things that are really important? So I liken this to when I was a chief exec. Prior to being a chief exec, I could walk around the corridors of my hospital, and there'd be stuff that I just wouldn't notice because it just wouldn't be in my consciousness. So things that you weren't necessarily responsible for, or things that you didn't think were as important, you just pass you by. And there could be things like cracks in the floor. Could people trip over that? Is that going to be an issue for people going from the critical care unit to theatres because it's right in the path of that? Is it something that could cause us a problem in terms of infection? Whatever it is, you start to see things that are much more relevant in that role than you would have done had you been in your previous role. So that becomes figure in that example, whereas in the past it was ground. So it's just paying attention to things like that. What do we notice when we're in our organizations, in our daily roles? Do we just do things on autopilot? So if you're driving into the office, if you're working in that kind of way and not working at home all the time, do you take the same route? Do you park in the same parking space? Do you say hello to the same people when you walk in? So do you tread the same path every day, and does that become your figure? Or do you have to think about taking a different path and just noticing different things, having conversations with different people? How does that affect the way that you do things, and how does it affect the way that you might frame some of the challenges and the thing that you want to try and work on? So you're paying attention to that, being aware of what you're noticing is so crucial. And obviously, as part of that, in the conversations and the meetings and the discussions and the team sessions that you have, what are you paying attention to? What do you listen to? And again, in the new way of working, it's so difficult, I find, to differentiate sometimes between the different days. If you've got a couple of days when you're on Teams calls day in, day out, How do you differentiate between the different conversations that you've had and the things that you need to take away and act on? Because everything just blurs into one if you're not careful. So I think more than ever, paying careful attention to what's happening and what's been said is a really, really important skill that I think we all need to pay more attention to. And then finally, as I said before, coaching, either as a recipient or as a giver of coaching, isn't what's your sphere of influence. So, you know, what are you able to control? What do you need to let go of? I'm sure a lot of people have heard people talk about the big rocks and the sand. So you spend an awful lot of time focusing on the big rocks, but it's the sand that glues it all together. And if you don't make room for both, you know, that could be problematic. And obvious things like urgent versus important. But if I come back to Wheel of Life, I use this an awful lot. So you can create any domains you want. There's just some examples that are given on this, and they might be ones that you want to start with. But if you wanted to pick the things that are important to you, either in your work or work life, because it could encompass all aspects of your lifestyle, and then you just create that wheel with these segments, and then you could score them. So the axis going from the middle to the perimeter could be on a range of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So for simplicity's sake, if you did it on 1 to 5, you just rank for each of those segments. Where are you right now in terms of your satisfaction for these segments? So, for example, if you don't feel that you're seeing your friends and family enough, it could be all sorts of reasons for that, but you know, you might score that a 3. You might also feel that you're not spending enough time with your significant other, so that might score a 2. But you might actually find that, you know, you're doing well in your job, you're progressing, there's lots of developmental support, there's some exciting tasks that are coming along, so your personal growth might be at a 4 or 5, and so on and so forth. So you can work that wheel round, and eventually you get something that looks a bit like a spider's web. And then, of course, what that does is it draws your attention to the things that you're saying they're going well, the things that potentially need a bit more attention. So it's back to that figure and ground thing. There might be some things that subliminally you know about, so you think, well, that's not telling me anything I didn't already know. But just seeing it in that kind of pictorial way starts to draw your focus to, well, what can I do about this? So where are the areas that I need to spend a bit more time and effort? And then from that, it's up to you how you would go about adopting a practical approach. But for me, it would be, you know, to make a plan, to make a list, and to aim to stick to that. So if I'm, for example, concerned that you know, health issues aren't what they should be, I might say, right, okay, well, every Tuesday I'm going to commit to going for a run. If it's friends and family as well, I might say I'm going to go for a run with friend. So you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. So just coming up with an analysis of where you think you're at is the important thing. That then raises awareness. You then move into, I'm going to take ownership of the options. So if you use the GROW model, you can follow that as well. How am I going to take that forward? So, you know, what are the options? How are you going to wrap this up? And then you come up with a plan. So it's a really simple way of doing things, but I think it's powerful. You can use it in lots of different situations. You can use it in groups as well, so you don't have to do it in isolation. It could be about some of your team issues as well, and you could use this amongst your teams and get some views and feedback from them as well. And then as a collective, you could start to form a plan and say, well, okay, we're low on this particular segment. What are we going to do about it? So as I say, I would thoroughly recommend this, and it's something I've used time and time again personally, but I've also used it with other coaches, and they found it really helpful as well. So it's just a practical, simple way of giving you that focus and giving you some options about how to move forwards. So if you move on again, thank you. Just some other things that you can try out. This is something that we've used in our organization just recently, and it's again just an icebreaker, if you like. You can use it as an icebreaker in any of your team sessions. But if you just spent a couple of minutes either by yourself or with colleagues, take a minute to reflect on this. Where would you put yourself right now? So, you know, depending on the situation that you're in, you can pick any one of these and decide whether that's you or not. But it's just another potentially, you know, fairly light-hearted way of saying where do we think we're at the moment? How are we feeling, either as individuals or as teams? And it just gives you a bit of an icebreaker into a conversation, which is then about exploring the reality of where you truly are. And then from the reality, as we've just said with the GROW model, you're moving into options. Okay, thank you. I think we're on to the last slide now. So this is something not for us to do right now, but I thought it might be useful if you wanted to take this away. And I don't know what your plan is for when you next get together. But you could take one of these options or both these options if you wanted to, and just have a think about how you could put this theory into practice. So if you took one of these away, and option one, you find a friend or a work colleague that's willing to act as your coachee, and just do a quick half-hour session with them. So use the GROW model, maybe talk through some of the things we've discussed just now. Make a note of how the session went, but in particular how it felt. So did you feel there was any distinct change in the way that you're doing things? What are you noticing about your reaction to these things? Also, what's the reaction of the person that you're with? Did anything change? Did it feel different? Get some feedback, and then just see whether or not that's something that you could potentially practice as you go forward. So was it beneficial? Or you might want to do something around reflective practice. So again, this is something that we're all going to be part of in the next few days and weeks, I'm sure. So pick an issue from a work meeting, look at something that you might have done around a decision or a report you presented, and just reflect on it. So be really, really honest with yourself about what you thought went well, what could you do differently, what could be better. And if you can, get some feedback from other people that were in that meeting or that presentation as well, so you can get some independent validation, if you like, of how it went, and get some feedback from them as well. So that just helps you think about, well, what could I do differently? That gives you a plan. Again, you can follow the GROW model with that. What are the options for the future? How are you going to take it forward? And just noticing how that feels. Does it help? Does it make you feel more confident? Does it give you some tools to think about next time? Without getting too introspective about the whole thing, it's just deepening your understanding of how you come across, how you can do things differently, how you can improve. So all these things can be constructed really positively, and I think ultimately give you a lot more confidence as an individual that you've got a way forward in terms of your own self-improvement. So that's it really. There isn't anything hugely different about coaching that I haven't already said. It isn't a techie thing. It's something that is very much about people, and it's very much about your individual interactions with people. And the question really is how much do you want to open up and generally want to take forward some of these issues and work on them and develop and grow your confidence. So I would absolutely recommend it as a practice. And we've got some time, hopefully, for questions. So hopefully that wasn't too long, not too detailed. And yeah, I'd like some feedback about whether the balance is right, please, if you're able to after the session. So over to you guys. I'm happy to answer or try and answer any questions.
Thank you, Chris. It was a very good session, and I think you've put quite a lot into a short amount of time. So a lot of learning that we can take away from this. I'm going to open it up to questions. If you've got any questions, just go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll call your name out. Okay, right. We've got Neeraj. Neeraj, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. A quick question for you. At what stage of somebody's career coaching is more beneficial? So, for example, in the finance department, we've got different grades, grade 3 up to 9. At what stage you would say coaching would be more beneficial for that person?
Yeah, thanks, Neeraj. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think quite a lot of you might say, well, is coaching just the exclusive domain of execs and senior people? And I would say, no, it isn't. It shouldn't be anyway. So the simple answer is it could be available to anybody. The question is whether that's a formal coaching program that's funded and supported with independent coaches, or is it something that you could start to develop from within your own organization? So if you've got an appetite to do this after today's session, then I'd be more than happy to look at how we could support you to get you on the way. And then once you're armed with some simple tools and techniques, this is about just changing daily practice. So I would say for all members of our teams, it should be available. And it's something that potentially we as a finance function could support and provide ourselves, so it becomes self-sustainable. There's also different aspects of this as well. I mean, when I was in my other organization, we had different reciprocal coaching sessions as well. So we partnered up with other organizations and we supported each other and tried to share the burden that way. So if that's an opportunity for you to do amongst other organizations, it does spread the load a little bit. sessions could be flexible. So one of them is always on a Sunday morning. So I'm very blessed that I've got a group of friends that I can run with every Sunday morning, and that does it for me. But the other two could change. So I'm on a WhatsApp group, and we might go at 7:30 on a Tuesday night, or equally, if everyone's got a window at 4:30, we might go at 4:30 if we're working from home. So it's just saying, right, on these days, this is what I'm going to aim to do. It doesn't always happen, and you might have to compromise and go the next day, or you miss one or whatever. But it's just making sure you've got a balance that builds in exercise and fitness. You try and look after your diet. You spend quality time with your friends and family, and then when you're at work, you give 100%. And I think if you can do that, then that is a great balance. But it doesn't always work for everyone, and everyone's got different stresses and different tensions and different lived experience. So this is not a panacea by any means. It's just an outline of how you might develop a plan that would work for you.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay.
Neeraj?
Just a quick question, Chris. You talked about reflective learning early on your presentation piece. I've seen reflective learning being used frequently in the clinical areas compared to non-clinical. Is that your experience as well? And if so, how can finance colleagues can use reflective learning to actually learn from it?
Yeah, like you, I've seen it in clinical practice, and I think more recently it's been mandatory for nursing colleagues. So it's something that I think we should learn from other clinical professions. How it would work in practice, I think, is as we've touched on today. So if it was you and I doing some reflective practice, I might bring an issue to you to say, well, this event happened. We had a really difficult meeting, things didn't go quite as well. There's some tensions and some complaints about how we presented this information, and I'm really concerned about it. So the reflective practice would be, well, how would we approach this differently with some peer support and review? Could this have been framed differently? Could we have done things in a slightly different way? What's the learning? And then how do you take that away and then develop that as part of your ongoing development plan? So that's how I think it works at a sort of simple level. But I think you can use that on a day-to-day basis. So the example that I gave at the end, one of the exercises that we could all try is really a case in point, isn't it? So we could all go to a meeting tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, and it might not go to plan, but how do you take some time to reflect on that and then think about how you reframe and do it differently the following week? Does that help?
Yes. Right. So do we have any more questions for Chris? If not, we'd just like to thank you, Chris, again for your time and coming to talk to us about coaching and its benefits. One thing I am sort of going to go ahead and take away from is the grow model that you've talked about, personally for myself, thinking it through and also using it as an activity, potentially in a team meeting coming up, just to get the conversation going within the team. So thank you again, Chris, for your time and coming to see us today. The slides will be circulated after the session. Right, so we will now move on to our AOB, and I'll open up the floor to see if anyone has any AOB that they like to raise before I move on to a few things I need to highlight. No? Right, so I've been asked to share a few upcoming events that we'd like to invite the sponsees to join if you can. So on Friday, the 28th of April, we are continuing the sponsor training series. I think these were 3 sessions, which will now conclude on Friday, the 28th of April. Wednesday, the 17th of May, we've got a session called Dialing Down Anxiety. Thursday, the 18th of May, we have our NHS Finance Inclusion Conference. Tuesday, the 13th of June, we've got a Confidence for Career Progression session. Thursday, the 13th of July, How to Distress session. And I want to highlight this one. Friday, the 15th of September, we have our annual sponsorship summit. So last year's one was really well attended, and I'd encourage everyone to keep that in your diary. So that's Friday, the 15th of September. We had a very good day. So I'd encourage you to sign up for that as well. So Natasha Plant will be circulating all the events and the program after this meeting. So we've got a bit of time left, but our session has come to an end. So I think we can all leave and get 20 minutes back into our diaries. So thank you again, everyone, for joining today. And we will see you. Our next session will be on the 7th of June. So I'm hoping to see you all on the 7th of June. Thanks, everyone.